Hi, Steve here with my weekly diet update. Okay, as you can see, I've lost a few more pounds. My body fat went down from 24 to 23%, so I'm happy about that. As long as I'm taking it off every week, I don't care if it's only 1%. So I've stuck to my diet and I've been to the gym every day after work, and I haven't had soda now for 5 weeks. I might have a soda when we go watch Gaylords of the Galaxy Volume 2, but I don't really feel like I need it. I don't really crave the soda anymore. Okay, so this week I will be sharing my Nintendo Gameboy collection, and it seems like I have more Game Boys than I do actual Game Boy games. I've acquired a lot of Game Boys over the past 15 years, some of them from thrift stores, some of them people gave to me. So I have a couple original Game Boys. This one was my wife's, this one was my brother-in-law's, he gave to me. And it has the little Handy Boy attachment with the little thumbstick and the buttons. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time with one of these when I was a kid on road trips, or if I was someplace boring with my parents. Or at the time, it was really impressive to have Nintendo-like games on a little handheld dilly-bob like this. Even though it was black and white, they still felt very similar to Nintendo games. And then we picked up this little blue Game Boy Pocket at the thrift shop for about $5. This was the same as the original Game Boy, only the screen was a little bit bigger, and I think it was a little sharper, the screen. Then I have 3 of these Game Boy Colors. I think we picked up each of these for $5. Or one of them might have been my wife's before we got married. These things were 8-bit, just like the Game Boy, but they were in color. There was still no backlight, so you needed a light to play them, but I thought they were pretty impressive at the time. And then here's a Game Boy Advance. This one's a lot more powerful. I think it came out around 2000. It's like 16 to 32-bit, so anything on a Super Nintendo you could pull off on this. I think the sound isn't as good on this as a Super Nintendo to me. And then this little flip-top Game Boy Advance SP. This one is backlit. I got this for my wife when we were dating for about $40, which was good at the time. She loves this thing. I like the design of this thing because you can just close it up and it won't scratch up the screen. It's a tiny little thing you could fit in your pocket. And this one will play Game Boy Advance all the way down to the original Game Boy games. Actually, all of these were compatible with the older games. Okay, on to the games. I like these little tiny cartridges. Here's Battleship. These are so tiny, I'm going to have to get closer to the camera. Race Driving for Game Boy. This is a lot like Hard Driving on the arcade. I remember that blew my mind when I was a kid, an actual 3D world to race around in, or stunt drive. This was pretty much the same game, or it was very similar, but it was on Game Boy, and it blew my mind how this could be on Game Boy. It doesn't look that great, but it is a 3D environment in there. You race around and you can go up ramps and go around the Hot Wheel loops. But it's kind of fun to play the game over and over to improve your time on the tracks. And here's Super Mario Land for the Game Boy. This is a really fun Mario game, very similar to the NES Mario. And I think it was a different director and a different development team from the NES version, but I didn't know at the time it felt so similar to Mario. I assume the same people worked on it. It plays really smooth and the music is good. It's just black and white, so it's kind of hard to see. But I really enjoyed this game. It had a little bit of variety too. Certain levels were spaceship shooter levels or submarine shooter levels. And here is my favorite Game Boy game, Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins. We have the case for that one. My wife was good about keeping the cases. And she kept a bunch of manuals for other games in there. Oh yeah, manuals. Yeah, but this was a really good Game Boy game at the time. It felt a lot like Super Mario World. I think it came out shortly after Mario World, so a lot of the design looks like it's based on Super Mario World. It's not quite as big as Mario World, maybe half the size, but still that's pretty impressive for a Game Boy game. And this was so much fun on road trips when I was a kid. And the music on here was just as good as any Mario game. It felt a little bit slower than the Nintendo one, but there was a lot of variety of levels and stuff to do in this game. So this is definitely one of my favorite Mario games. And then here's Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3. This was one I never really played. My wife had this. I think she enjoyed this. Here's Kirby's Dream Land. That was a little impressive platformer back then. Everyone's got to have Tetris. This is the reason why most people bought the Game Boy, was to play this game. I remember at Target or Walmart, whatever it was at the time, I would just go to the video game section and sit there and hog the Game Boy on display and sit there and play Tetris while my parents were shopping or whatever. Tetris 2, I don't really know much about this. This is my wife's. All I know is it has bombs. Tetris Attack. This is one of my favorite games too. It's a little puzzle game. It's not the same as standard Tetris. It's more like match the different colored blocks. Where they weren't color, they were black and white. But the different designs of the blocks, you match them up. Kind of like all these games kids are playing now, like what is it, Bejeweled or Candy Crush. Something like that, but it was more frantic and fast-paced because they're constantly dropping down like Tetris, these little shapes, and you have to match them up. Anyway, this game was a lot of fun. And then Pokemon Red and Blue. I never played these games at all. My wife had one and my brother-in-law had one. So, and my brother-in-law gave them to my wife, so she has the red and the blue. I guess these games are some of the top-selling games of all time. I was never into them. I think if I was a little bit younger when they came out, I would have been more interested. Here's The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX. I think this is a little bit improved version. I think it might be in color. You can play it on a Game Boy Color. And I never beat this. I think my wife did. My wife beats more games than I do. But this is a lot of fun. You can get some power-ups on this game that you can set to the A-B buttons. I think you can even jump in this game. One of the powers is like a feather or a boot or something that lets Link jump. And then I noticed there were some Mario enemies in here. I noticed little Goombas and Potaboos. And here's Toon-Sylvania. It's a little platformer. It's pretty good from what I played of it. We got this at the thrift store with another game, Racing Rats. We got these two together for a few bucks. This one's a platformer. You go around and collecting stuff. It looks pretty interesting. Game Boy Color. And this little Racing Rats is a little overhead racing game. Here's Driver for Game Boy Color. I think we picked this up at the same thrift store for a couple bucks, a different time. I like the Driver on PlayStation. This one's an overhead view, like the original Grand Theft Autos, and I'm not really big into that. But for what it is, it runs really smooth and it looks pretty good for an old Game Boy Color game. Okay, here's the highlight of my Game Boy collection, and I just ordered it online for a few bucks. Resident Evil for Game Boy Color, the original Resident Evil. When I was a young man, maybe around the time I graduated high school, I was obsessed with video games more than I should have been. I should have been worried about other things, but the game on my mind was this, because Resident Evil was probably my favorite game at the time for PlayStation, and I found out that they were going to release it for Game Boy, so I could take that thing with me anywhere and play the original Resident Evil on a little 8-bit portable system. And I remember looking at magazine articles and magazine ads saying it was going to be released. I think it was around 1999 or 2000. And at the time, this was the best handheld console there was. There was no 32-bit console that could play Resident Evil, but this little 8-bit thing was going to pull off Resident Evil on on this little tiny 8-bit Game Boy Color. And from the pictures I saw, it looked really impressive in the magazines. I really wanted this game to play on road trips or play when I'm waiting for a class or whatever. This would have been my game back then if it would have been released. But I guess Capcom had some people in the UK develop this game, and they weren't pleased with how it was looking. I think it was kind of pushing the machine too hard. It looks beautiful to me. Like I think they could have pulled it off, but I guess Capcom wasn't pleased with it. They thought it wouldn't live up to the expectations of the consumer, so they canceled it, which was a disappointment. It wasn't until a few years later I got a DS, and then they released probably the best version of Resident Evil on Nintendo DS, so I was happy to get that. But I was a little bit older then, and I had other stuff going on at the time. I would have really loved this Game Boy game. And now that I played it, I did download the ROM, and I played it on my modded PSP, and it is impressive for a Game Boy game. It has all of the camera angles from the original PlayStation game. It has all the rooms, pretty much every item in every location as the PlayStation game. It's not polygonal characters like PlayStation. It's like the little character sprite is like scaling in and out when the character goes in and out of the background. But it's still, I would never expect this to happen on this little 8-bit. That's like having Resident Evil on a Nintendo. I think this thing might be a little bit more powerful than the original NES, but still, they have Resident Evil. Okay, so the game wasn't complete, so it was about 90% of the game. But some kids got a hold of the ROM and hacked it up to make the game beatable, and they put it on these little cartridges, so I had to buy one online just so I could put it in my Game Boy and play it and pretend like I was back 20 years ago playing it. But anyway, I guess the game is completable in this form. It has a lot of bugs, and it's not a complete game. I've noticed a lot of the enemies are missing. I don't know if they could have I noticed the only zombies are in here, and there are no dogs. And when you get to a boss like the giant cobra, it doesn't move, it just sits there. So the game's not totally complete, but I think they could have pulled it off with a little bit more time. Yeah, so I'm really glad to have this in my Game Boy collection. Okay, moving on to Game Boy Advance. They had this little NES Classic series for the Game Boy Advance with a lot of the original NES games released on cartridges for the Game Boy Advance. So we have a few of those. Here's Dr. Mario for NES and The Legend of Zelda. So these are just the NES games on cartridges, which I'm glad to have. Here's Excite Bike and the original Donkey Kong. Oops, sorry about the glare. And then here is, moving on to the regular standard Game Boy Advance games, here's Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2. These are my wife's. I'm not sure if they're exactly like the Super Nintendo. I'm sure they made some little tweaks with it. Here's Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. I guess this is a role-playing game with Mario and Luigi. I hear it's pretty good, but I'm not really into role-playing games. I might give it a try someday. But it was a couple of bucks at the thrift store, so I had to get that. Here's WarioWare Inc. That's just a bunch of little mini games. My wife liked it, so I'm not really into that game. And then here is Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. And this is Super Mario Bros. 3, an enhanced version of Super Mario 3 for the Game Boy Advance. So this is an enjoyable Super Mario 3 version to have. But anyways, it's fun to have Super Mario 3 on a portable system. And then back in the day, they had these little Game Boy Advanced videos where there would be episodes from cartoon shows on a cartridge. I think they were a little bit cheaper to buy than a video game, but I had never seen videos on a cartridge before. Now it's no big deal. You can put thousands of hours on a little SD card, but back then, like maybe a half hour of SpongeBob was impressive to have on a little portable Game Boy system. I guess little kids could sit there and watch SpongeBob on their Game Boy in the car back then, before they had iPads or Androids or iPhones. Okay, that's about it for my Game Boy collection. I'll see you next week with my diet update. Bye.